So I'm just making this video to go ahead and talk about the deck that we've actually been playing, which is Counters Company with the Kitchen Finks variant. Um, so this deck typically runs 21 or 22 lands depending on both personal preference and which build you're running. I've found that in the Kitchen Finks version it's best to have 21 lands compared to the Knights build, which I feel runs best with 22. Both because you get utility lands and you get more lands to sacrifice to your Knight of the Reliquary. But primarily here to talk about the Counter Finks version. So the basis of this deck, as with any Counters Company deck, is a 2-card combo, Devoted Druid, which you tap to add a green and you can put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it. So on its own, you can get a double burst of mana out of it, which is really relevant when, say, you don't hit a land drop and you really want to hit company on 3. You can still do that with just the Devoted Druid. But the real combo here is you add it to Vizier of Remedies. Vizier of Remedies says if one or more -1/-1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many -1/-1 counters -1 are put on it instead. That's a lot of -1s. So, if you remember, Devoted Druid says put a -1/-1 counter on it and you get to untap it. So if one less than one of them would be put onto it, you put 0 -1/-1 counters and you get to untap it. Effectively, you get to tap it and untap it at no cost. So you have unlimited green mana. With unlimited green mana, it's relatively easy to win. With 3 Duskwatch Recruiters, you can dig through your deck 3 cards at a time until you find your Walking Ballista to make it infinitely large and shoot your opponent in the face until they're dead. There are multiple ways to find this Duskwatch Recruiter. You can Court of Calling, you can use Viscera Seer to help you scry to it, and you can Collected Company. Also, Tireless Tracker lets you draw cards with clue tokens, so if you've kind of been setting up for a little while with Tireless Tracker, you have the option to use that to dig and try and find the actual win once you have infinite mana. One thing that's interesting to notice is Collected Company is not a guaranteed win if you have infinite mana. It lets you look at the top 6 cards, which I've done the math for it. If you cast Collected Company with 50 cards left in your library, you have a 32 and some change % chance to hit a Duskwatch Recruiter in those 6 cards. And if you can chain a company into a witness into a company, you've got more than a 50% chance of winning on the spot. Just some of the math of how that works out. Obviously, if there are fewer cards in your library and you haven't drawn any of the Duskwatch Recruiters, you have a better chance. If you have a Duskwatch Recruiter, you just win on the spot. Things like that. So let's talk about the additional combo. That's the core combo of any Counters Company deck that you run. Some decks will run Shalai as an additional way of winning the game once you've assembled infinite mana. I found that the 3rd Duskwatch Recruiter and the Soul Walking Ballista are enough. I've never run into a time where I said, man, I really wish I had Shalai as a cord target. You cannot hit it off of company. And the rest of the slots in the deck I really kind of want to keep how they are, so it would be a Duskwatch Recruiter getting cut for it, and that reduces our chance with Collected Company with 50 cards left in the library down by 10%. So you go from a 32% chance to a 22% chance of hitting it. And I found that it's better to just be more likely to be able to kill them off of a company once you have infinite mana. So after that little sidetrack, back to the secondary combo in this deck. Vizier of Remedies, we know what that does. Kitchen Finks is the namesake of this second half of the combo, this secondary combo. It has Persist, which says when this creature dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters, it returns to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter on it. So, Vizier, no -1/-1 counter. So, all you need now is a way, to kill your Kitchen Finks. And we have that in Viscera Seer. Viscera Seer, you can sacrifice a creature for no cost and you get a scry 1. So this, combined with Vizier of Remedies and Kitchen Finks gives you infinite life. And it also gives you the ability to scry to the most powerful card that's still in your deck for the rest of the game, assuming they don't interact with your creatures. Against a fair number of decks in the format, infinite life is enough to win on the spot. If they've drawn more cards than you, then it's a guaranteed win on the spot. If they haven't, you get to scry to your best card for the rest of the game and move on from there. And so you have a pretty good chance of winning once you've established infinite life, even against decks where infinite life isn't necessarily a knockout punch. The thing that I want to talk about in the main deck now is flex spots. For a long time, this is a deck I've played almost exclusively for the past year or so, with touching on it before that as well. And when I first started playing it, I played the Kitchen Finks version. And I had 4 or 5 flex spots that, you know, I had a Shalai, I had a Kasali Pride Mage, because this was before Night of Autumn, I had a Scavenging Ooze, I had a Fiend Hunter, I had a Selfless Spirit, and every once in a while, 1 or 2 of those would switch around depending on what I felt like I was afraid of seeing most. And that led to a lot of games where I had individual cards that I would either draw or see off a company that had a very low impact in the matchup. So against blue-white control, if you collected company and you see a Fiend Hunter, you're not exactly the happiest to see that. And in the same instance, when you're playing against Storm, you're not exactly happy to see your Selfless Spirit. So I ran into a lot of situations where I was drawing cards where they were maybe a 2 out of 10 in the matchup where I would see them. And you know, they were there as a Chord target primarily. Chord lets you find any creature in your deck. And so, you know, having these silver bullets, at first I thought, oh, you know what, this is going to really help me to be able to have a really strong edge in certain matchups that I'm afraid of, and I'll be able to, you know, get those edges and gain a really strong advantage in the matchups that these individual cards are for. Ultimately, I got really frustrated with the Kitchen Finks version. I felt like I was losing games more than I should. I felt like I wasn't having as much fun playing it. It just wasn't a great match. So I switched to the Knights version. The big difference here is that you get Knight of the Reliquary over Kitchen Finks, which lets you play some utility lands like Field of Ruin, Bojuka Bog, Tectonic Edge, Ghost Quarter, whatever else you feel like running that day. And I played this for a while. I had 4 Knight of the Reliquary and 3 Tireless Trackers, and I felt like, you know what, this is really a powerful deck. I can do some really powerful stuff. I still have my infinite damage combo, infinite mana, which is enough to beat almost anything in the format. And, you know, I've got this nice fair plan with Knight of the Reliquary and Tireless Tracker to really be able to take it home if I can't combo off necessarily. I played this version for probably 6 months out of the past year, and ultimately, after talking with 2 of my friends, Tiny and Hoffman, who are better Magic players than I am, we talked about it and decided, you know what? I'm not sold on the Knight of the Reliquary. It seems like it's slow in a lot of matchups. It can get a utility land, but there are a lot of matchups where there isn't really a great utility land for that matchup. And what I learned from playing counter Knights for these 6 months was that Knight isn't the powerful card in this build. It's Tireless Tracker. Tireless Tracker and Knight, you can play a fetch land, get a basic, sacrifice the basic to Knight of the Reliquary, get another fetch land, get another land, and you get 4 clue tokens out of nowhere. And, you know, the unfair or the fair decks just can't keep up. So what I decided to do was, instead of having all of my utility flex slots that I had in the Finks counter version before, was I decided to trim the weaker, the more narrow, you know, the cards that maybe are 10 out of 10s in some matchups, but are 1s or 2s out of 10s in others, and put in something that's a solid 6 or a 7 in almost every matchup and really has a floor of about a 5. And there are a lot of matchups where it's a slam dunk 10. So I cut the Fiend Hunter, I cut the Shalai, I cut the Selfless Spirit, I put in 3 Tireless Trackers. I did keep two different utility creatures in the main board. I have Knight of Autumn because it's all three of its modes are relevant in different matchups. You can have a 3-mana beater when you need it. You can gain 4 life against really aggressive decks like Burn, and you have Artifact and Enchantment Hate in the main board. So if you come up against an Ensnaring Bridge deck or against Boggles, you've got this ability to fight through that. And Scavenging Ooze is good against aggressive decks. It's good against grindy decks like Black-Green, and it's good against graveyard decks. So the utility of both of these creatures and just their general power level, the fact that they're never really bad, that they're at least a 4 or a 5 out of 10 all the time, led to me having these two utility creatures in the main. So after playing with the Tireless Trackers in the Knights build, I wanted to try them in the Finks build and found that, you know what? They're great. They're just as good as I felt they were in the Knights version. Sure, I don't get to go, all right, make 4 clues out of nowhere with Knight of the Reliquary, but, you know, even 2 or 3 clues is enough to really turn the tide against any of the fair decks that you really need to grind it out against. So that's how I landed on my main deck. I really want to maximize my combo pieces, so I have 4 each of Devoted Druid, Vizier of Remedies, I've got 4 Kitchen Finks, I've got 3 Duskwatch Recruiters, 4 Chords, and a Walking Ballista, so I have 8, effectively 8 Devoted Druids between Chord and Druid. I've got effectively 8 Viziers with the Viziers and the Chords, and then with the Duskwatch Recruiters, the Chord of Callings, and the Walking Ballistas, once again, I have 8 of that combo piece. The only combo piece that I don't have 8 of, a virtual 8 of, is the Viscera Seer, because it is by far the worst card on its own. It is only good in the combo, so I only want to be courting for it when I get that chance. So that's my main deck. The mana base took a little bit of adjusting from the Knights of the Reliquary version. I opted for a second Gavany Township. I cut the Bajuka Bog because without the ability to tutor for it, it's not great. I kept a Field of Ruin because it's found its utility against Tron, against opposing man lands, particularly in the fair matchups like Green, Black, and Jund, and has some utility in other matchups as well. And I added an extra fetch land and cut a basic land because I'm not looking to sacrifice my lands to go get a utility land with Knight of the Reliquary, so I don't need as many lands with basic land types. And the extra fetch makes it so my Tireless Trackers are better on their own in the fair game. So that's how I really got to this entire main deck. Now let's talk about the sideboard. I had this all sorted and it got wonky thanks to switching over to look at the other deck for a little bit. So I'm just going to sort this by mana cost and we can talk about it there. Okay, so first up, Path to Exile. Anybody who plays Modern knows what this card is. It's a 1 mana unconditional answer to any creature that doesn't have Hexproof or Shroud. And it's really important for the decks that are really, if you get 1 extra turn to be able to combo off, then you know, if you can stem the aggression to get that extra turn, you really want to bring in these Path to Exile. So against things like humans, sometimes spirits, you can bring it in against Burn. There's just a lot of matchups. Any creature matchups, you really want to bring in Path to Exile. It also is good against decks like Green-Black, where they have a very limited number of creature threats that can actually kill you. You know, a lot of the times they'll ride the back of 1 Tarmogoyf and, you know, 1 Gurmag Angler or something to really try and kill you. And so being able to answer that, they have to really fight to find another threat. Next up, we have 2 of the more unique choices. We have Remorseful Cleric, which you sacrifice to exile cards from target player's graveyard. This is pretty obviously just a graveyard hate piece for Dredge, for Storm. This lets you interact meaningfully with what they're trying to do at a low cost. You can chord for it as early as turn 3. So while it's not necessarily the fastest, if you can cast it on 2 or chord for it on 3, it tends to be pretty good against those decks that you want it. The most experimental piece right now is Phyrexian Revoker. Phyrexian Revoker enters the battlefield choose a non-land card, and activated abilities of that card can't be activated. This is primarily for the Tron matchup, where it's not a particularly bad matchup. It's kind of a coin flip, but Phyrexian Revoker is there primarily to name whatever big dumb thing they're trying to cast. So if they're casting Ugin, the hope is to be able to chord for it in response. If you're, if there's a an Oblivion Stone on the battlefield, you can use Phyrexian Revoker to name that before they have the chance to activate it. So that's what that's there primarily. It also has some use against blue-white control. Being able to name Teferi or Jace can be handy. If there are any other matchups you can think of where it's really good, let me know. Or if you have other cards that are great against Tron and against other things that Revoker would be good against, let me know. I'm always willing to try new things out. Next, we have Assassin's Trophy and Abrupt Decay. These kind of fall into the same camp as secondary removal and also just general permanent removal. Where Path to Exile is only good against creatures, Assassin's Trophy can hit literally anything and has the same drawback of giving them a land. So this is fantastic just as kind of a general catch-all, where if there's a specific permanent type you're worried about, you can always bring this in versus something like the more narrow answers. Night of Autumn is great against artifacts and enchantments, but what if there's a land that you need to blow up like a Tron land? What if there's a Planeswalker that you're really worried about? Assassin's Trophy is just kind of a general catch-all, but giving your opponent a basic land is a very real cost. For a long time, since Assassin's Trophy came out until about 2 weeks ago, I was playing a full playset of Assassin's Trophy, just as kind of I want to test this, I want to see where it's good, I want to see where it's bad, and ultimately realized that the land coming in for your opponent was a huge drawback, especially against decks like the Phoenix deck, the blue-red Phoenix or Runaway Red. Giving them an extra land to be able to triple spell early to be able to cast their 3 spells in a turn to get back their Phoenixes and things was a huge cost. And so I wanted to put back Abrupt Decay. For a long time, the standard was 3 Abrupt Decay, 3 Path to Exile. Now you'll see a lot of 2/2/2 splits, but I personally found that I want the 1 mana interaction a lot against the really aggressive decks and against things like Infect. And the benefit of Assassin's Trophy hitting everything actually turned into something of a downside, where you think, you know what? I don't have any answers to what they're doing. I'm going to bring in my 4 Assassin's Trophy, and then you have these 4 cards that, yeah, they kill whatever you want it to, but that's not necessarily the game plan you need to be on. Sometimes you just need a combo and not try and interact. Sometimes you would just be better off with any other creature in your deck. So I ultimately trimmed it down after more testing and more talking with Tiny and Hoffman to 1 Assassin's Trophy and 2 Abrupt Decay. Abrupt Decay hits anything with any non-land with cost 3 or less, so it's good in most of the same spots. Sure, it doesn't hit Jace, it doesn't hit Teferi, but again, we ultimately realized that the removal plan isn't where you want to be against Jace and Teferi decks. Next up, let's look at Sin Collector. Sin Collector, when it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand, and you get to exile an instant or sorcery from their hand. Now, this is a lot better than something like Tide Hollowsculler, which, while a 2/2, if it dies, your opponent can get their card back. Sin Collector just says, nope, get out of here, you're gone forever. This is great in any of the fair matchups, blue-white control, Jund, and it's good in unfair matchups too. Against the Phoenix decks, it can, hit their enablers, their cantrips and things, and just slow them down by a little bit. If you are playing against Storm, you can take them off of an important combo piece. If you can tag, a Passion in Flames or a Gifts Ungiven, that's kind of the dream. Sin Collector is also just good in any matchup where you really want a 2-for-1, as long as they play a reasonable number of instants or sorceries. Tireless Tracker. Remember what I said about how I wanted cards that are just consistently good and really strong earlier? Tireless Tracker is so good in the matchups where it's good that I needed all 4 in the 75. I found that in the fair matchups, Jund, green-black, blue-white, blue-white-red, Mardu Pyromancer, anything that's really trying to fight fair and grind you out, Tireless Tracker was hands down the best card in the deck. Not even close. Better than Collected Company. If I could play 8 Tireless Trackers and 0 Companies against just those matchups, I absolutely would. Tireless Tracker is insane in those matchups. It lets you draw cards. It's a big threat that has to be answered. And it's also hittable off of Company and easy to cord for. Though you don't necessarily want cord in your post-board games against those matchups. Knight of Autumn we already talked about. It's a beater when you need it. It destroys artifacts and enchantments, and it can also gain you life and be a blocker against the really aggressive decks. Eidolon of Rhetoric. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. You want to bring this in against things like the blue-red Phoenix deck. Anything that plays Phoenix, really, if they're trying to play 3 spells in a turn, obviously it's great if they can only cast 1. You want to bring it in against Storm. This is primarily a Storm hate card, but now that the blue-red Phoenix deck has come out and become a thing, the Eidolon of Rhetoric does have some additional utility in that matchup as well. And the final card, again, one of the ones that maybe isn't as industry standard, is Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. This is, once again, for the fair matchups. I found in playing this deck that the fair matchups were really where I was starting to struggle. So I wanted something that would be immune to Terminus against blue-white, be hard to remove against green-black. I wanted it to be able to put a serious clock on my opponent. I wanted it to be able to just grind really well. And Gideon fit all of these bills. So what I ended up doing was I searched through every single green, white, and black creature that cost 4 or less, and all green, white, black, and colorless spells that cost 5 or less. And ultimately, this was the card that won out. Gideon has proved itself time and time again. Anytime where I want to grind or to beat down, Gideon has proven very, very good. He can make 2/2s to chump block their Tarmogoyf until you can draw something relevant to catch up. He can make 2/2s forever, and then they have to use a Terminus on not even a full card. If your opponent taps out like a goon, you can activate and smash in for 5. There are a lot of times where this is just the best card, or one of the best cards in your deck. And every once in a while, I still haven't done it, but every once in a while I'm sure you can find a time where you really just want to emblem and get in there and kill someone. So this is the list that I'm currently playing with for Counters Company. I've been working on this list for a long time, particularly over the last few months as I'm getting ready to head to the Star City Columbus team event in January with Tiny and Hoffman. We'll be forming a team with 2 Storm players and myself. So this is the deck. If you have any questions, anything that you like or dislike about how I've got it built, let me know. I'd be happy to talk about it and see if I've already had the thoughts you've got, or if you've got something new and mind-blowing that's really going to help me out in the matchups that I've been having trouble with. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you can catch me on stream soon.